Stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons is more important to him than controlling oil prices. Hezbollah says it has targeted Israel's air defense system near the town of Caesarea, which houses Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's private residence. Iraqi Ports Company says that 2 vessels were set ablaze near the port of Basra as strikes across Gulf continue. Iraq says 1 crew member has been killed in this incident, while 55 others have been rescued. The Indian government says a total of 3 Indian nationals have been killed. 1 is still missing in maritime attacks amid the West Asia conflict. In the latest, 1 Indian national was killed after Iran struck a US-owned crude oil tanker of Iraq.
India's crude supply position is secure and volumes secured exceed what Hormuz would have delivered.
Energy Minister Hardeep Singh Puri assures that there is no shortage of fuel in India amid mounting concerns due to the Strait of Hormuz's closure. He says there is no crisis of petrol, diesel, kerosene, ATF or fuel oil. All right, let's get to the breaking development that has come in a short while back. Iran's new leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has delivered a message to the nation. In a message read out on Iran state television, Mojtaba Khamenei has issued a fresh warning to America and Israel. This is, remember, the first time that he has publicly spoken after the US and Israel began their war on Iran. Mojtaba Khamenei has said that Iran will not refrain from avenging the blood of its martyrs. He's also added that all US bases should immediately be closed in the region or attacks will inevitably continue. Mojtaba Khamenei went on to say that closure of the Strait of Hormuz should be continued as a tool to pressure United States of America. He is, remember, the son of late Ayatollah Khamenei, who was assassinated by America and Israel on the first day of the war. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian's son earlier claimed that Mojtaba sustained some injuries in the ongoing war, but he remains in good health. The new Ayatollah has also activated his account on social media platform X, where he is identifying himself as the revolution's leader. So essentially, he's not using the title of the supreme leader, which was officially ascribed to him. Instead, he's calling himself the revolution's leader. Now, this message from Mojtaba Khamenei, remember, contradicts the earlier statement made by President Masoud Pezeshkian, who had issued an apology for conducting strikes on the Gulf countries. Iran's Secretary of Supreme National Council, Ali Larijani, and the Parliament Speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, have continuously maintained that attacks on US bases in Gulf and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz will continue.
We've knocked out all of their boats. They have some missiles, but not very many. I think we're in very good shape.
This is a war imposed on us. Transportation of oil has been slowed down because of the attacks and aggression made by Israelis and Americans against us.
Amid the ongoing war with Iran and doubts over it ending soon, the U.S. President Donald Trump has put on a campaign hat as he addressed the crowd in Kentucky. In his campaign against Republican Thomas Massie, Donald Trump touted the success of Operation Epic Fury. The Republican leader claimed that United States has won in the very first hour. Over the past few days, remember, Trump has claimed again and again that Iran's air capabilities, navy and top leadership are gone. He also went on to say that there is nothing left to target in Iran. However, the president also mentioned that Iran is tough.
We don't want to leave early, do we? We got to finish the job, right? Over the past 11 days, our military has virtually destroyed Iran. Tough country. Their air force is gone, totally gone. That took the better part of about 3 hours.
On America's end, there is still no clarity on when its operations in West Asia will end. When asked about the back-to-back attacks on the vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump simply said that the crucial waterways will be open in due time. But more recently, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said that U.S.'s ultimate option is to destroy Iran's ability to threaten its neighbors and the Strait of Hormuz. He's also added that the American military is currently not ready to escort tankers through the critical Strait of Hormuz because all of its assets are focused on striking Iran. Now, as per reports, there are indications from the U.S. intelligence that Iran's leadership is still largely intact and is not at risk of a collapse anytime soon. The report cites that even after 2 weeks of relentless American and Israeli bombardment, consistent analysis that the regime is not in danger of collapse and retains control of the Iranian public has been seen. Remember, Iran has laid out its own specifics to end the war. Not only has Tehran shifted its military strategy from retaliatory to sustained strikes, Iran has narrowed its objectives as well to 3 main demands. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says that the war will end only when these 3 conditions will be met. And what are these? First, the recognition of Iran's legitimate rights. Second, payment of reparations. And lastly, international guarantees against future aggression on its soil. Now, while Trump asserts that the war is nearly over and Iran has set its own conditions, American ally Israel says that the war will continue, refusing to set a timeline for the end of fighting with Iran.
As an army, we still have a broad range of targets. We will expand our operations. The goal is to undermine the foundations of this regime, the terror regime, and we continue to harm it. It is already undermined, and we continue to harm it. We have another long plan.
And joining me on the broadcast is Colonel David Rosesh. He's a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute and former Deputy Director for Peacekeeping in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He joins us live from the United States. Colonel, good evening. Welcome to WION. I want to start by asking you what you make of the latest developments. You know, you've got the U.S. president accepting that Iran is tough. It has been a tough country to crack. At the same time, he's saying that there's nothing left to strike in Iran, but we will not leave early from Iran. You know, he's been sending some really contradictory messages.
Yeah. Well, contradictory messages is kind of how he operates. I mean, he's not a traditional politician. He's not a diplomat or traditional statesman. And he talks in a somewhat undisciplined manner. I be a speechwriter for, not for the president, but for a cabinet member. And it would always drive me crazy when they would stray from the speech because they would say something that was, you know, would come back and be a problem. And then I'd get blamed for it. But with Trump, he speaks from the hip, and part of that is because he wants to confuse people. Part of it is because he holds the traditional media in contempt, and he realizes that if he can say something that is somewhat inconsequential but different, that they'll focus on that instead of focusing on something that might be more consequential. But part of it is he has two different audiences he needs to speak to. So the American people were not really consulted before this war. They will support it if it is short, victorious, and relatively cost-free in terms of life. So for the American people, he has to say, this is going to be short, this is going to be quick, we're going to get everything we want. But for our adversaries in Iran, he needs to say, we're here as long as you want to be here, and we've got plenty more coming, and no cost is too high for us to achieve our goals. So, the sooner you recognize that, the less punishment you're going to take.
So Colonel David, who's going to differentiate that? I mean, in his mind, perhaps he's speaking to two different audiences, and one of them might be just, a very clever strategy to confuse your adversary. But who's going to differentiate that? There are conflicting messages coming out of America, and not just from within America and the Trump cabinet, but also between America and Israel. There seems to be a difference in how they're approaching this conflict.
Yeah, well, ultimately, President Trump decides when we're done. I mean, this is one of the luxuries of expeditionary warfare. When you're operating at a distance, you can leave at a distance, and the consequences are of leaving quickly and perhaps disorganized are not as big as they would be for, say, Israel, for whom this war is an existential war. So that's something that drives people crazy. But, I mean, if you look at Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan, that came as a surprise to everybody. I don't think President Trump is contemplating that, and I know that if he doesn't achieve, he has nailed his colors to the mast. If he does not achieve his military goals here, he's going to pay a very heavy price for it. It will be his legacy will be gone. So this is a big issue for President Trump. I think that, there are signs that the Iranian security apparatus is showing stress. And I think that he'll probably achieve his military goals within 2 weeks at the outmost. But it's going to be 2 rough weeks.
Colonel David, it's interesting that despite the kind of setbacks that Iran might have faced in terms of its security challenges, their new leader has just put out a first statement since his appointment. And interestingly, he's not calling himself the supreme leader. He's calling himself the revolution's leader, clearly sending out a message that this is still not over. And this is a revolution that we have to take against the United States of America. And many experts around believe that with Iran, they would perhaps like to continue this conflict longer so that the new leader can cement his position as a revolution's leader and make sure that, the crowds, the Iranian citizens are all in this together against the West.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that analysis, but let me give you another possible interpretation, which is that Iran's constitution calls for an Islamic revolution that's perpetuated, and the constitution says this at home and abroad. So I think referring to him as the revolution's leader, I think is a message to Iran's proxy forces. Lebanese Hezbollah is also in an existential fight with Israel at the moment. And I think also, we have the Houthis, and then, of course, the Iranian-directed militias in Iraq, which have been attacking the U.S. Embassy. So I take it as more of a call for Iran to activate their Arab armies overseas to take action against us.
And therefore, how do you see this moving forward? Because you've got Iran, which is retaliating strongly. You've got Donald Trump, who's saying we're not going to leave early despite the fact that we've got nothing left to target. Then you've got Benjamin Netanyahu saying that this is not over yet.
Yeah, well, first off, there's plenty left to target. And what we're seeing is that the asymmetry of cost has shifted in favor of the U.S. and Israel, where instead of firing expensive missiles at a distance, we're flying over targets and dropping very inexpensive bombs and firing anti-tank missiles. So, the Iranian missile strategy, on the other hand, to me indicates that they have no ability to launch coordinated volleys of fires. They've dispersed a few missiles, perhaps 100, which are around the country that fire in a disorganized fashion, mostly at civilian infrastructure. That's a sign of weakness, not strength. So I think that we'll continue to see attacks against the military structure and against the elements of internal security forces that conducted the massacre of protesters in January, there was a checkpoint manned by individual Basij militiamen that was attacked in Tehran yesterday. That's a very, very not a good sign for the regime, showing that individual soldiers just checking people in cars to see if they're going to protest the regime, that was targeted. So there's a lot of targets and there's a lot of fighting to happen, but I think the initiative has shifted against Iran.
I mean, Colonel David, if you're defining weakness through the fact that this conflict has also seen civilian targets, what about the U.S. military allegedly killing 165 schoolgirls in an elementary school in Minab? There are reports all about it.
Yeah, that is an element of weakness that the U.S. has in acquiring good information on targets in the ground. I'm still unable to draw a conclusion just because there's no objective reporting in Iran. So, as you know, the Iranian regime has a policy of taking reporters hostage, but we were bombing in the area, and I think that it is quite possible the school there was adjacent to like 600 yards from a Revolutionary Guard Navy command post and was originally part of that naval base and then had been converted from military access to a school in 2016. So I think it's quite possible that there was an identification made in 2011 that was carried forward through error. But I don't know any serious person who suggests it was a deliberate targeting. Even if you think the worst of the U.S., think that we deliberately targeted a school at the outset of the conflict, you'd have to ask yourself, first off, why we haven't been doing it repeatedly. And secondly, why would you target a school in a remote province rather than in Tehran? So there's an ongoing investigation, but I think given the amount of what's going on, I think Iran has said they mistakenly fired 2 missiles at Turkey. These sort of things happen, and they're always a tragedy.
Okay. Collateral damage is, one of the first casualties of war, and unfortunately, we have seen that coming from both sides. But I'll leave it there, Colonel David. Thanks very much for joining us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
All right, let's also tell you how Israel and Hezbollah continue to exchange fire as the Iran war spreads across the region. The human cost of this war has been staggering in Lebanon. New dramatic visuals are emerging from Lebanon's capital, Beirut. An eyewitness video captured in the early hours of Thursday shows thick smoke rising along Beirut's Ramlet al-Baida seafront as people are seen running away from the area in panic. The strike hit a busy beachfront road in the city, triggering chaos through the night. Sirens from police vehicles and ambulances echoed across the street as emergency crews rushed to the scene. Security sources say at least 6 people were killed in the attack. The strike is part of a wider military escalation after Hezbollah fired a massive barrage of rockets into northern Israel overnight. Israel says nearly 200 rockets were launched, which is the largest Hezbollah attack since the war began. The Israeli military has been ordered to expand operations inside Lebanon. Intense airstrikes have already pounded Beirut's southern suburbs, lighting up the night sky and setting buildings on fire.
Yesterday, Hezbollah launched heavy barrages of fire at the state of Israel. The IDF responded forcefully in Dahiyeh and against Hezbollah targets throughout Lebanon. I warned the Lebanese president that if the Lebanese government does not know how to control the territory and prevent Hezbollah from threatening the northern communities and firing at Israel, we will take the territory and do it ourselves.
The human cost has been growing rapidly. Lebanese authorities say more than 600 people have been killed in Israeli strikes across the country. Around 800,000 people have been forced from their homes. New footage from Beirut also shows displaced families gathering along roads carrying mattresses, blankets, and their belongings as they search for safety.
نحن ضد التصعيد.
We are against the escalation. We don't want war, we want peace. We want our children to live in this country and secure their future in this country so they can live. War leads nowhere except to destruction, devastation, and death. We don't want war, we want peace. Let them find a solution already and end this, because people are exhausted and worn out.
Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, thanked Tehran's allied armed groups across the region, including in Lebanon, Iraq and Yemen on Thursday. He said, and I quote, "I also express my sincere gratitude to the fighters of the resistance front." With Hezbollah warning of more operations and Israel expanding its offensive, the conflict is rapidly pushing Lebanon deeper into the regional war. Right, we're slipping into a short break at the moment. On the other side of the break, we get to how the fuel crisis sparked by the US and Israeli war on Iran is rippling worldwide. India hasn't escaped the fallout. More details coming up in just a bit. The United States is opening a new front in its global trade battle. The Trump administration has now announced new investigations into what it calls unfair trade practices by dozens of countries, a move that could pave the way for new tariffs. Washington says the goal is to protect American jobs and ensure fair trade. But this move risks escalating tensions with key trading partners worldwide. The U.S. Trade Representative's Office has launched two separate investigations under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, the same legal authority previously used by the Trump administration to impose tariffs on Chinese imports during his first term. The first investigation focuses on excess industrial capacity, essentially looking at whether countries are producing far more manufactured goods than global demand, potentially flooding global markets with cheaper products. According to U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer, the probe will examine economies including the European Union, China, Japan, India, Singapore, Switzerland, South Korea, Vietnam, Taiwan, and Mexico. Officials say the investigation will focus on countries where there is evidence of structural overproduction across various manufacturing sectors. If the United States concludes that these practices are harming American industries, the investigation could lead to new tariffs or other trade penalties. The second investigation, expected to begin shortly, will focus on imports linked to forced labor. Greer says the probe could affect around 60 American trading partners, examining whether countries have laws that prohibit the import of goods produced using forced labor. These investigations come at a critical moment in the U.S. trade policy. Just weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court had struck down President Trump's global tariffs, ruling that he exceeded his authority by using emergency economic powers to impose duties on imports from nearly all countries. In response, the administration quickly imposed a temporary 10% tariff on imports, which will remain in place until the 24th of July, while officials work on more permanent trade measures. Despite the court setback, the administration says its broader strategy remains unchanged, protecting domestic industries and reducing what it sees as unfair competition. Some tariffs, including sector-specific duties on steel, aluminium, and automobiles, remains unaffected by the court ruling and are still in place. But the timing is notable. The investigations are unfolding just weeks before an expected meeting between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing in April this year, where trade tensions are likely to be high on the agenda. And let's talk about India now. The fuel crisis triggered by American and Israeli strikes against Iran has had a cascading impact on the world, and India has not been immune to these jitters, as the critical Strait of Hormuz remains a flashpoint in the ongoing war. In the past few days, Iran has warned and targeted vessels passing through the Strait of Hormuz. With the corridor at the epicenter of this war, global energy supplies have taken a substantial hit. in securing national consumption and interests, India has been in continuous conversation with Iran on the diplomatic front. The foreign ministers of both countries have spoken thrice in the past few days, with New Delhi seeking Tehran's cooperation in a safe passage for vessels heading to India.
External Affairs Minister and Foreign Minister of Iran have had three conversations in the recent days. The last one discussed issues pertaining to safety of shipping and India's energy security. Beyond that, it would be premature for me to say anything.
Domestically, the fuel supply shortage has become a political issue now. India's parliament erupted into a ruckus today as opposition leaders began chanting and shouting slogans on the floor.
I rise to inform. No, nahi bolne. Kerosene and fuel oil is fully assured. No.
Amid the chaos, the Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, Hardeep Singh Puri, claimed that India's LPG production increased by 28% in the last 5 days and that there was no shortage in the country of fuel and that alternative fuel options are being activated as well to address the needs of 33 crore families of India.
India's crude supply position is secure and volume secured exceed what the Hormuz would have delivered. Before the crisis, approximately 45% of India's crude imports transited through the Hormuz route. Thanks to the Honorable Prime Minister's outstanding diplomatic outreach and goodwill, India has secured crude volumes that exceed what the disrupted Strait of Hormuz could have delivered in the same period.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition, but we will keep getting you the latest developments and decode for you the entire West Asian conflict as and when it is happening there in that region and its impact on India. Thank you very much for joining us right now. Bye-bye.